moving to the bulk of my assignment, what I didn't like about the game. Starting with the plot. Again, this is an unfair comment just because I can't read Japanese, but I didn't feel like there was much of a plot in the game. Like, I knew that there was the alien seed that we found. I know that we're on the space station. We're trying to regroup our classmates. But I felt like there wasn't past that. There wasn't really a solid plot line. I felt like there was 4 or 5 subplots.
It is kind of all over the place. I mean, the central plot is kind of simple. You know, you find the Mistral, the alien Mistral. You get well known for it. You get rewarded with the field trip up to the cluster space station. Space station gets lost in space, so you have to regroup your classmates and climb your way to the top. I mean, it's kind of straightforward, but then, like you said, there were a number of other subplots on there, such as the hunt for the masked beetles, meeting Anzuto and Cameo, and trying to help figure out what they want and why they're on the station. The space robos and all the different developments with those. It's kind of a bunch of plots all thrown together that kind of tie itself back into one, which is, if done correctly, can be good, but it does leave a lot of disjointed questions of what exactly is this character and what is their importance to the plot.
Yeah. And on the mention of game mechanics, this is more so nitpicking, but my own personal opinions for a lot of these. When it came to Navi, this was basically my biggest concern when it came to the meta change as a concept, whereby you were no longer motivated to mix and match. You were just
Right.
more motivated as like, I want a full Medabot so I can shift change or power change. This is what I want to stick
Right.
with. So that the original unique concept of Medabots I found, or what I believed, would have kind of got lost because of.
And it is definitely a very valid answer as well, because that is kind of the mechanic of Metarod, is being able to mix and match. It wasn't until Metarod 3 that, like I mentioned, meta change was officially introduced, which added a whole new facet to how to build teams together, because now you didn't have just 3 skills at your disposal. You now had 6 and quite possibly 2 different leg types. But it did kind of take away from the ability of mixing and matching to find that sweet spot on your own without relying on an alternative form.
And there's also, when it came to the meta change, you no longer had to worry about your 4 separate parts and losing like a third or half your power. Like, if you lost your legs, like in the regular core games, like, oh crap, there goes half my heat and cooldown abilities. If you
Yep,
lost an arm, it's like, okay, there goes half my fighting ability. And
I can recover from this.
yeah, it's like, this isn't too bad, I can recover. But with shift change, it's like that all goes out the window.
Oh yeah, if you hit 0 HP while transformed, you are out cold. And that was and it is worth mentioning that that is definitely um, a very worthwhile risk that you take. Now, there are a lot of very good mechanics that can be used with a proper and well-changed meta, absolutely. But you have to be able to weigh the risks on if you're willing to do that and fuse all your HP into one, because the moment you change back, it actually equalizes your HP across all 4 parts. So say, for instance, if you took a hit to your legs and the legs went down to, say, 1 HP, well, yeah, you were still in the game, and when you transformed, you still had all of the HP minus that one hit. But when you changed back, suddenly all your parts had damage on them, but your legs were a little healthier than before.
Yeah. But that kind of brings up my question. Like, this is just specific to Navi. I think in future games, I think everyone was moved over to power shift only.
It was kind of on and off, actually. They did kind of maintain a nod to shift and power shifting with meta change, and especially with Meta S more so, because there are a lot of bots that can transform back and forth as they please, but there were also a handful that had skills, or drives as they were called, that required a certain amount of charge in their gauge to use. The difference, however, is it actually ate that amount of charge from your gauge to use it on that turn. So, for instance, say, I'll just pick one out of a hat as example. Grain, the Archdevil type from Medabot 4. When he was brought back in Medabot S, you were able to use his drives B and C, which were destroy and counterattack, pretty much as freely as you want. You can shift back and forth on every other turn if you wanted and spam both of those as you please. But his drive A of Pile required him to have 10 CG in his gauge to use. And if you didn't have 10 CG, well, guess what? You can't use Pile. Or if you only had 10 CG, you on your next cooldown, you could either change back or you could use counterattack or destroy, but you could not use Pile again until you had more charge in your gauge. So they were able to maintain that aspect to a point with some minor tweaks.
Okay. But it's also like, you played a lot of Medabot games. Has there ever been a reason to change back to your original 4-piece sets after you meta changed? Like, for me, I'm a casual player, and I've just never felt the need to change back.
It depends very largely on the model. And again, it ties back to me saying that you have not just 3 moves, but 6 moves, sometimes 6, between 4 and 6, between a standard mode and your alt mode. So it would honestly depend on how you wanted to play or how you use them. Trying to keep it central to Navi, Grand Beetle and Kaiser Beetle, for instance, had 2 rifles and a Gatling attack along with their bipedal legs. But when they transformed, they maintained 1 rifle move, which was notable, rifle or Gatling if I recall correctly, but they were notably stronger than their base mode. But they also exchanged 2 of their moves for cross attack set and release. So that kind of tied it into, do you want to nuke them quickly, or do you just want to kind of balance it out as you go based on control? But then there are other models that have completely different kits where Blazer Multi, a perfect example actually. In her base form, she is a defined solid healer, just like Blazer Maid. But if you transform her, she becomes very aggressively oriented. So at that point, you have to decide, do you want a fighter or do you want a healer? And at that point, if you decide at any point, I need a healer, you have the option to shift back and use her for her healing capabilities, but then shift back on your next turn as necessary.
Okay, let's see. The next point when we're talking about game mechanics. This might have been, again, going back to because I couldn't read Japanese, but when you had your own tin pets, if you chose them as your teammates, they were just set on autopilot. Like, you could not actually control them. Was there actually a way to change that, or was that just for everyone?
It was an ingrained mechanic, and I think it was explained in the story. I don't quite remember who I heard it from or where I read it, but I want to say it was explained in game as I want to say it's like a multi-party system that was implemented in the MetaWatch, where you could use your own machines, but you're only allowed to pilot 1 at a time. So say, for instance, if you had Grand Beetle and then 2 mixed fighters that you threw together with mixed parts, you could use all 3 and then 2 random party members, sure. But depending on who you picked as your number 1 bot would be the one that you controlled. So if you chose Grand Beetle as slot number 2, whoever was slot number 1 was the one that you controlled and gave orders to.
Yeah. This is probably just a me thing, but as I was playing through it, I always felt like I was playing from behind. Like, I was always, in a lot of the fights, I felt like I was always the underdog. There was never that moment of, I've gotten stronger, I've gotten a part, or I've gotten a meta part, or a teammate was like, yes, this is what I need. But I'm going to chalk that one up to just because I can't read Japanese. So certain strategies that would have made things easier, I just couldn't understand.
Well, you actually wouldn't be too far off either, because even if you look at the character bios as to who's there, it kind of makes it's kind of very obvious that Kazumi is not the most confident player either. So it's very easy to tell that you're not going to be expecting much from him as a player character compared to some of the other dynamically engaging characters. In fact, translated, and I'm playing this from the Metapedia as well, For Kazumi, it reads that the player character and protagonist of Medabot Navi. He is the victim of bullies Mizore and Gosetsu, jealous class president Niwakwa, and abusive tomboy Hiyori. Kazumi Asano, who actually was mentioned to me to have 2 surnames, and it's not 100% sure why. Asano and Shinonome were both of his surnames, but again, no explanation as to why. He becomes rather popular after he and Shiden discover the alien Medabot Mistral underneath the abandoned school's gymnasium. The field trip to the space station cluster goes awry when it separates and goes adrift. As the new class president, Kazumi must assemble his council and reunite his students while trying to save the cluster from certain doom. It says, Kazumi's starting Medabot is Windclap, a Griffin type with both attack and support abilities. However, its East medal is stolen by Mizore, leaving him without a functional Medabot until he finds a medal under the old school. This glows into the cluster prototype, either KBT model Grand Beetle or KWG model Sonic Stag, and acts as their avatar for the duration of the game. Of course, it also derives that Kazumi's name derives from Asa no Kazumi, which translates to morning mist. And interestingly enough on that, since I actually am on this page, one of the other really big points that was mentioned to me is all the characters' names, Hiyori, Kazumi, Mizore, Fubuki, and so on, they all have names that are based off of weather or weather patterns.
Interesting.
Kazumi is mentioned as morning mist. Hiyori, I'm just going to kind of read off here, comes from Koharu Biori, which translates to Indian summer. Mizore, Gosetsu as in heavy snow. Mizore as in sleet. Fubuki as in snowstorm, which actually kind of makes those last 3 kind of funny because Fubuki, Mizore, and Gosetsu kind of make the allegory of the Screws Gang for Medabot Navi, if you noticed.
Yeah, a bit.
Mizore and Gosetsu kind of took a liking to Fubuki. She didn't like it, but eventually gave up trying to hold him back. So they often partnered with her whenever they got the chance. So a lot of really interesting allegories as well. I mean, just thematically, for characters and for names. So it's really nice that they took a lot of these different themes into account when they were designing their characters as a whole.
I could chalk that up to being low leveled, but I felt like accuracy and damage were kind of hit and miss or all over the place.
That has always been a recurring theme.
It's like every time I faced an opponent, I felt like laser's supposed to be very powerful but inaccurate. I always got hit by the goddamn laser.
Yes, and even in 2 Core, just to use another title that was localized as an example, at really low levels, you sucked. I'm just going to be outright and say it. You sucked. You had the complete inability to dodge. In fact, you didn't even know what dodging was. Your attacks were kind of all over the place, like you mentioned. And if you were playing Stag Beetle version, you kind of relied on radar sight in order to hit anything, or you were just doing a blind swing into the dark. But then, of course, as you leveled up and you got stronger, you would go back and fight again, and suddenly your bot knew how to dodge every move that came their way unless they were incapable of it.
Yeah, which is why a lot of my playthrough, you see me always start a battle with scan.
Yes, because it is absurdly broken in any game that's played.
Or at least you would think. But again, it's hard to tell when my Medabots or my allies would have hit that marker. It's like, okay, we now know how to dodge. We now know how to be accurate. I'm assuming they actually would have done it at around level 30. But that's a pretty high...
Thereabout. That's when they start really kind of understanding how to play and how to fight properly.
Yeah. So it would make sense that everyone on my team sucked because I moved them to the final fight when everyone was like, 25, this is good enough.
I'll live, maybe. Proceeds to die horribly 8 different ways from yesterday.
I think some of the comments was like, I'm surprised you made it through. It's like, I don't know what I'm doing here. I just kept bulldozing my way through.
Listen, man, I know not why I'm here. All I know is I must fight.
I also didn't know that after I beat the Robo Leader, it's like, oh, you're now forced into a 5 continuous roll battle. It's like, oh, crap. I didn't even know.
Oh, yeah, marathon fights. Those are always fun.
I'm going to skip my complaint about the leveling system, getting the AP. Just because, again, this was a very new game pretty sure they didn't have much to go on of
Didn't
what
quite
was,
think everything out.
yeah, like what was a fair amount of AP. But this does get me to my one point of I never used the Metaforce just because it would always require 25 action points. And to use it without being on a generator would mean I'd have to be like
Yeah.
I think I have to be like level 40 or so.
Yeah. And I definitely agree. I think if they changed the AP generator and the percentage modifiers they use on how much is determined you get at this level and this level, it probably would have made using the more expensive ones a little easier to use or more encouraged to use them. Because like I said, for instance, Bug Stink, when you first are able to use him, his arms can hit like a truck, but he's just so expensive to use that even moving, you have to take 4 turns just to get him to sit on a generator. And then that's also assuming that you're able to coax the enemy to come close enough that he can shoot them.
But I will say the one downside to the Navi game was that your core members, you could not put them in a base to level up without you. That is one complaint I have to point out, which sucked because, like, aside from Blazer, the other guys are kind of like, I don't know if I actually. You are very situational.
That's actually a really good point, though, now that you mention it, because as you climb the cluster space station and regroup all your classmates, you find there are a lot of classmates, and some of them honestly can be really stupidly good to use, and those are the ones that you stick with you at all times. But then there's others that are like they're either completely useless at low level, or they take far too much time to raise before they actually become decent. And by that time, you're already at post game or end game, and it's kind of too late to use them or work them into a party because you kind of already have your niche. So yeah, I 100% agree. If they implemented a way that they could, and this is kind of tying into a future point of like how we'd improve the game later, if they brought it back, if they were able to redesign the AP generation numbers on the back end and make those just a little bit more generous, and then also make it to where deploying students in modules would actually give them some EXP bonus, even if it's just a little bit of a bonus. That I think would massively boost a lot of the quality of life in terms of how often they want to encourage you to use other classmates as party members.
Agreed. All right, moving on to the next point in terms of visuals. We kind of talked about it, how the portraits for post-game characters didn't look as well designed as the main characters, but that's probably, I'll chalk that more so towards the post-game characters were just kind of an afterthought. And it's like, yeah, this is just fanfare.
Right. And like I said, you could only do so much with a very limited number of sprites within the size of the mugshot. And with it being 16-bit, you only had so much of a color palette that you could pull from before it probably started eating into memory or became too detailed. So I can't fault them too heavily on that one, especially because the sprites in battle looked really nice with like 3 different levels of shading. So I can agree that the mugshots on there definitely could have used just a little bit more work, but at the same time, I'm also not willing to completely harp on them either, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. It's like, this is not about the meta fighters, it's about the meta bots. That's where you want to put all the details. So for putting the two together, I will always take the meta bots having the better design, mainly because they were moving, they were the main concept. So I'd rather they be the best looking out of the entire game.
100%. I'm 100% with you on that one.
And then my last negative point on the visual, just because this will just forever live rent-free in my brain. Why, with Navi's meta change, did you have slender legs? That will always live rent-free in my head.
Yeah, that like I said, Navico was just kind of there, but she was very central to the point of the plot, so I really can't fault it too much for that. I really can't say anything on why they chose to do that for her design. Like I said, that would honestly be a question more for Mr. Kenki if you ever did get the opportunity to speak with him.
I just keep looking at it, just like, I really hope this wasn't your idea. Like, there's like 10 different ideas you could have gone with.
I mean, you cannot overpower the waifu. At the end, when it comes to aesthetic, the waifu always wins.
That's the answer I'm afraid of here. It's like, we did for waifu for balls. Like, I'm really afraid that that's the answer.
I mean, have you looked at some of the more recent female designs he's made? Alba Noel, Gothic Mate as examples. The waifu wins. It's kind of a given.
All right, actually moving forward here. Music. I can't really fault it
I really
too
have
much.
nothing to say.
Yeah, I don't really have
I
too
really
much.
have nothing to say. It was an absolute banger of a track.
Yeah, the music was good. Locations, like I said, I don't have any complaints about it. There was a good variety, and everything just kind of fit together on the aspect of this is a research facility, so everything just fits.
Right, with completely different biomes for different types of research. So it was very obvious to tell that they wanted to make sure that they could test subjects in any kind of environment.
And last point being for characters, because I can't read Japanese, I was always wondering why everybody hated our character. It's like, what did we do? What did we do to deserve
Yeah.
this?
Right, and I think we did kind of cover that as well. You did say you said very especially that it felt like playing as Kazumi felt like you were constantly playing as the underdog.
Yeah.
And to a point, you are indeed correct, because he's not the most confident character there is compared to, say, Ikki from the Medabots 2 through 4, or Hikaru from the original Medabot 1. He's just an elementary school student, you know. He's didn't really think there would need to be a whole bunch there, and suddenly now being the class president, he's like, great, now what do I do with all this? So it makes sense, but as a whole, I also like the time that went into making all the characters and making each of them unique, though. But again, being EN speakers playing a Japanese game, it's easy to miss out on a lot of those.
Yeah. All right, going to what may be more discussion points. Would this game have done well outside of Japan? And again, this is where being outside of Japan, we have a lot of bias because we only got Core 2 remake,
Yeah.
we got AX, and that was a 2002 game, whereas Navi was a 2001 game. It's like,
And then we had Medabot Brave on the GameCube, which did not really sell that well either. But
okay,
honestly,
we're talking about Brave. I would play Navi instead of Brave, if I'm being honest.
hands down, absolutely. I have my own personal thoughts about Brave. I'm not going to bog the video down with those, because that's a whole nother topic unto itself for a completely different retrospective if that's ever attempted. But would Navi have done well outside of Japan? I'd say yes, personally, primarily because the idea of SRPGs like that, Advance Wars, Fire Emblem, it was very obvious between those titles that those games can do well, and they were pretty well received. But with it being a Medarot-based title, it'd be kind of tough to kind of sell it properly, because there's just so much new stuff that was implemented in Navi that it'd take a while to properly warm up a global community to the idea of seeing it and playing it.
Yeah, but there's also that aspect of there's no familiarity with Navi. People had like everyone outside of Japan just knew the anime, so if Navi came out, nobody would have understood. It's like, what's happening? Where's Ikki? Where's
Who's
Medabot?
Grand Beetle?
Yeah.
Who's Sonic Stag? Yeah, you know, where's Ikki and Medabot? Yeah, that's 100%. I 100% agree. Absolutely, there's no familiarity, like you said. There's no new character. There's no recurring characters until post game, and at that point, you're already so attached to the new characters. You're like, why are you here? Like it's nice to see you again, sure, but why? So I definitely 100% agree. Is theoretically, could it have done well? I think it very easily could have. But because it has, for the most part, basically a whole new cast of characters and almost no recurring ones, it kind of would have worked against it to that point.
Yeah. But if I were to say, like, if all the regular Medabot games came out of Japan and then Navi came out, in that aspect, like, I think Navi would have done fine.
It probably would have had a better chance, yeah.
But because I'm comparing this to Core and AX, Navi would not have done well outside of Japan just because like everyone's familiar with these designs, this kind of gameplay. Like from gameplay aspect, it actually might have survived, but I think people would compare it in terms of visuals, like just how the sprites looked in AX and the remake, and then you compare it
And
to
they would
that
have had
to
to
Navi.
spend they would have had a good had to spend a good chunk of their PR trying to explain with Navi that it has a completely different set of cast members and characters for a reason, so that they could try to quell all the people on the coast saying, "Hey, where's Icky and Metabee, or where are the Screws, or where's the Robo gang? Where are they?" And they have to constantly explain it's a new game, different characters, and that probably would not have been received very well. But if they were to have, say, made Two Core or a sequel to Two Core using Navi's play style or using their game engine, I think they probably would have had a little more success with that because they'd at least be able to use familiar characters and not have to argue as heavily why they're using a new style and new models because they can say, well, most of these people recognize from the anime anyway.
Oh yeah, like if they did a Core 2 sequel using Navi's style based on like the characters from Medabot Spirits, there would be no issues.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it would have been they would have been able to tie it into the anime very, very easily, and it probably would have saved a lot more. It probably would have saved them from a lot more of the backlash that they got for Spirits, because when it was initially released and aired, Spirits did not receive very well. It was very mixed because they did away with a lot of older characters. They changed studios, so they took a lot of they cut a lot of corners with animation and development. You could tell it didn't quite have as much of a budget as the original first two seasons did. So it having a new game kind of based around that probably would have saved them a little bit.
Yeah, but to speculate, like would this have done well outside of Japan? Navi would not have done well outside of Japan if it was released.
Right. It could the short answer is it could have, but there'd be a lot of red tape and ground to cover to make sure that it was received so that it could sell well.
Yeah, Navi would fall into the category of cult classic, loved by, like played by the few, but probably loved by many.
If you know of it, it's very well loved, but it's one of those titles that unless somebody told you about it, you probably wouldn't even know it existed.
If this game got a reboot, would it do well? So kind of like comparison to Core 2.
I absolutely for a fact think it would. If they rebooted the game, it would sell well. Like if kind of like what they did with Pokemon with the Diamond and Pearl remakes, just not as sucky, obviously, because the community already knows that Navi is a thing, and they already have an idea of how it plays and how it behaves, so they already know what to expect. But if they were to have remade Navi with better graphics, of course, using the 3D models that we have from S and even some of the other, making the models that we don't have yet, even using updated sprites if they wanted to do that instead, rebalancing the AP generation mechanics like we said, kind of doing some minor tweaks on stuff here and there, making sure there aren't as many bug fixes for things. I absolutely think if they rebooted Navi, it would sell.
Yeah,
I without a doubt think it would.
yeah. In today's market, if it was a reboot, given a new coat of paint, fix the certain issues, and rework a few things, like I'll explain this when we get to the improving the game, but there's actually not too much that you need to redo. Like it just needs some minor fixes. The game just needs minor fixes, which is actually amazing if you kind of look at it in hindsight. It's like we say, it would not have done well outside Japan, but in today's market, when people know a lot about Medabots now, it would do very well if it got a reboot.
Oh, not just that either. Like even if we took the idea of Medarot out of it and we just introduced it as an SRPG title, on say the Nintendo eShop or something, those kind of games are actually selling and being very well received. Advance Wars, Fire Emblem, Super Robot Wars, they're very well-loved titles, and the genre and mechanics as a whole is most certainly very well received, better now than they were back then. So even on that front alone, if they were to pick up Medabot Navi and say, oh, this is new, let's give it a try, with no prior experience or knowledge of Medabot, I still think on that front it would do a whole lot better today as a reboot or a remaster than it did back then.
Agreed. Was this game just a cash grab? No, there was I can't in good
I think it's kind of
conscience say no.
obvious that yeah, I think it's kind of obvious that this wasn't. Like, it's obvious that they were using it as a way to showcase the stronger GBA engine, much like I said early on. But I think that they fleshed it out enough, for the most part, that it was also able to stand alone as its own thing and not just be, like you said, a cash grab. Like they actually put emphasis on making sure this worked.
Yeah. So moving on to how would you improve the game? We talked about the bug fixes. One point that I don't know if this would fix or make things complicated. I guess maybe a slightly bigger map. Like it's a 9x9
Yes.
grid. I don't know if the game would benefit from a bigger map, but I kind of think it would because in some instances, like shooting Medabots they have the big advantage of just
They have almost the entire outer ring of the map as their range.
Yeah.
And if anybody's within that range, then they can't use it. But pretty much from sitting in a corner, they can hit almost everybody without needing to move.
Yeah. And usually with the shooting bots, like if they choose to run away, it's like, oh, I'm using up my entire turn to chase after them. It's like they're not attacking you, but you're also not attacking them.
Right. And at that point, it kind of becomes just a drawl because you're now playing a game of tag, trying to catch them at a point where they stop moving, and you have to whittle them down, which eats into your time and makes the fights last much longer. But no, I 100% agree. If they were to bump up the map, like let's just say like a theoretical remake or reboot, and they decide they're going to pull out all the stops. If they did say, I think the 9x9 grid was probably like a way to keep it small for like a proof of concept, which worked. It absolutely worked.
Oh yeah.
But if they were to expand it to say, I'm just going to pick a random number out of a box, say a 12x12 or a 15x15 grid, that would make it a whole lot more dynamic because some of those models that have such a massive range of who they can hit from what point, or the ability to need to move closer to an enemy, would become much more necessary so that you're not having to find that one sweet spot and just plant your butt there because you can hit 3 different people.
Yeah. And I think the movement system could have more of an extra variety or two. It's like we talked about push and pull, or how Island Croc can pull your allies together.
On that, I think just by increasing and this is just my thought. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I think even just by expanding the tile terrain to say, like, again, a 12 square grid or a 15 square grid, that alone would probably fix about 60% of the drawbacks or the chaos that comes with crowd control. So say like Island Croco as an example, if say on a 12x12 grid, he goes and hides in the very far, upper right corner because he can't really fight all that well, but suddenly his range pulls everybody from all over the map closer to him. Well, guess what? He can now create more chaos by pulling people all over the field on that much larger grid than you can him just slightly inconveniencing you by moving forward one space.
Yeah.
So it would give more bots like that have the push and pull, the ability to do much more on their turns and be much more of a viability than just a minor inconvenience.
Yeah, definitely. And then the last thing is make leveling up your Medabots a little easier or faster.
Yes, and I believe we have mentioned that before, that the level growth was pretty notoriously slow. And if you want to try to raise everybody for like if you're a min-maxer, probably about 90% of your playtime is going to be just using everybody and trying to level them up.
Yeah. It's like, I didn't mind their system of hunker down these guys and they level up without needing you. But the fact that I had like 5
You have
characters
so many different classmates, yeah, that you won't use nearly any of them.
but it's also like
And by the time you get to the end, you already had your team.
the main 5 were like you could not actually have them level up without you. It's like the main 5.
Yeah,
They were always stuck with you. It's
yeah.
like that's one complaint I have. It's like, why are you guys stuck with me? You will be so much better after I grind by myself and then come back and get you. Why must you be on my team?
Yeah, I mean, like, for instance, with Gosetsu, who uses Bug Sting, it would make more sense that for the research module that gives you Bug Shield, which is his upgrade, it would make more sense to be able to stick him there because it'd be him that benefits from that upgrade more than you just being able to get the parts.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just a couple minor things overall that could be fixed decently easily if you know your way around how to code and program. But if they were to remaster Navi and fix all those issues, or even completely overhaul it for a 3D, for 3D instead of 2D, I absolutely think it could sell well. It's very abundantly clear that SRPGs are a very well-loved genre in today's gaming.
Yeah. And again, just to push 2 points together on would the reboot do well and how to improve this game. If we look at Navi, there are just very few actual complaints. It's just a matter of rebalance. Like the issues are just very minimal. Like it is a good solid game. It's just unfortunate that.
And I 100% agree. And honestly, that's actually good for a game though, where the only complaints are I don't have an issue with its mechanics. I don't have an issue with the characters, the story. The only thing I have is just balancing. If that's the only real complaint that can be pulled from your game, I'd say you did a pretty good job.
And then getting to the last point is like, would you recommend this game? If we're
well, that's kind of obvious.
Like we would recommend this game, but if I go back if I was to use a time machine, it's like back in the 2000s, would I recommend this game? Then that would be a maybe.
Yeah, and again, it kind of ties back to the fact of if you don't know about Navi or if you aren't very well versed in it, then it's definitely a lot to swallow because you have to learn basically a whole new system with whole new characters. But if you know what you're doing going in, it's not nearly as bad and it's more palatable. But given all the time that's passed and of course all the models that were brought from Navi into S for new recognition, the new models that were inspired from Navi because of Mr. Kenki, it's very obvious, and a lot of people have actually said, and funnily enough, despite all these points that we've mentioned, when I ask or when we talk about wanting to do translation projects or what game we should do next, Navi is almost always, like without fail, almost always in the top 3, if not the top choice.
Yeah.
The only reason that we've not attempted it yet is primarily because A, we don't have people for it, but B, because we're working to kind of doing the games in chronological order, we're getting ready to wrap up with 3, and we've already started decompiling 4 because they're all on the same Game Boy engine.
Okay. Yeah, no, it makes sense. But yeah.
So we absolutely want to. We just don't have the people that are willing to help with it.
Yeah. So getting back to my train of thought, I couldn't recommend this back in the early 2000s because again, like I'm speaking from a Canadian outside of Japan. It's like if I were to just say, hey, try this strategy RPG, it's like, yeah, sure, no problem there. But as a Medabot game, it's like I don't know because again, there will always be that bias because I played the Core 2 remake and AX. So it's just that will always be there. I can't really get out of my brain that unfair comparison of comparing those games to Navi.
Right, and I 100% agree that because we've only had so much, or rather so little of exposure to it as a Western audience, we only have we only have a very small reference point of what to expect. So unless you willingly start playing those other games and overcome the language barrier on your own, you really don't know what to expect. So like you said, if you were to recommend this, back when it first launched, I agree. You know, it may not sell nearly as well because it was a very it was a bold attempt. They started with something completely new, almost from the ground up, and it made it really difficult to sell it properly. But with today's technology, with being able to open the code almost with 2 clicks of a button, if not literally, and the ability that there are translators that want to go around and fix a lot of these older games, I think it very easily could kick off.
All right, and with that, any closing thoughts?
Um, well, first of all, I would like to say, first of all, thank you so much for having me with you on your channel. It's been an absolute blast. I have been following, your support and with your gameplay of Medabot Navi for a while, so it is always nice to gush about Medabots with a fellow fan.
I don't have
I
the
am looking
greatest
forward.
gameplay, I will admit that.
No, but still, as a fellow, as one Meta-rodder to another, I do always appreciate it and do love having that common interest. So I do appreciate that. You've definitely done a very big service for the community. A lot of folks do reach out, do mention you for folks that want to say, look into Navi or heard about what it is or whatever, or even your gameplays of other videos. You have been a reference point for those for quite some time for that very reason, even before I started becoming the VTuber that I am with the news that I cover.
I find that
So
shocking because
so
I've always
yeah,
been
much
gone.
respect to you on that one. Yeah, much respect to you on that front for what you brought to the community, and I do appreciate and thank you for that. I would love to be able to possibly coordinate something with you again sometime soon, whether it means me guesting on your channel once again, or if you decide to stop in on mine, learn the ropes of Metarod S and give it a shot. More than happy to give you a hand with that. Or if you decide to maybe try a new game down the pike, you did mention dual and GM as possibilities, but if you are looking for something new, I have mentioned numerous times now, Metarot 3 is basically finished. It's basically just minor spelling and grammar checks at this point just to make sure it works in English, so you don't have to fight any language barrier for it. But yeah, tying back to Navi, it was a very bold attempt to showcase the new GBA engine with a new cast of characters and a completely new playstyle. I think it was definitely a success overall. A couple minor points that needed to be fixed or looked at, maybe cook a little longer, but otherwise, no real complaints, very lovable and memorable designs, and an absolute legend behind the mecha development. There's really nothing to say behind there. Banger soundtrack, very engaging play once you know what you're doing. But yeah, I highly recommend Navi from the bottom of my heart. If you have not played it, it is definitely recommended at least watching somebody else play it. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And definitely learn more about the series from a very unique title in the mainline series.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me, and I guess I'll see you guys when I go back to Duel and GM to finish those projects.